This should be information that underlines what we need to do to move this country forward. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Live Leaders on the Frontier. My name is David Leis. I'm your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. And it's August 27, 2026, the year of our Lord. And by golly, do we have a lot to talk about as we talk about trade, this unfolding story about not just, public policy, but politics. So where are we at now? What's next in the trade story? And how does this impact you, every Canadian? And we want to also provide you, through all this loud, complex noise, what do we think is really happening here? And I really do have the A-team. I had them on earlier last week. We had basically part one of a discussion, and that was, of course, with Dan Mattig and Catherine, from the Coalition of Manufacturers, Catherine Swift, and they did a terrific job breaking that down. So we're going to continue to break it down, given the importance of this issue for our country. And keep those comments coming. Cracker says, like this video and converse with David and guests. It's great to have input on important topics that are presented to us each week. Thank you, David. I learned so much from these sessions. And that's really music to my ears. It actually makes my day because, no, we did not arrange that comment, but that's the point of these discussions. We want to approach them with a clear-eyed view. When we talk about heated topics like trade, we need more adults in the room who are trying to understand the issues that are in the interests of both Canadians and even our neighbors, the United States. So this is a historic time. So thank you very much for your comments. And there's we get thousands of them. Very interesting conversation, gentlemen. Thank you for all that you do. And that's from LOL. I was born in 1954. Love my life. Fabulous interview. And I think that may have been from Patty Smith, and that was related to a fascinating discussion with my good friend David Coletto, who's the president and CEO of Abacus Data, about understanding public polling and that impact on what Canadians are thinking and that relationship to public policy. So that was dropped on Tuesday. Very good conversation, gentlemen. Thank you for making the time to have this discussion. It needs to be shared and will do my part. And that's from Sean McFarland. Thank you. So keep those comments coming. Well, as people come on today's program, we've got a few headlines that I think are very interesting. One of which is from Blacklock's Reporter, a terrific news service. And this is by the federal minister of finance. There's no mention of deficit targets. And this is interesting as we talk about compensation for Canadian during potential losses of a, quote, widening trade war. In another story that was just came out recently, Canadian warship to cross the Arctic on a historic, quote, sovereignty voyage. This is a modest-sized ship. It has a helicopter, and it's interesting. This will be the third time, I believe, that that voyage will be made. Tariff assessments must wait. So we will have to remain, as we talk about compensation about a trade war, they're already looking at these significant packages being offered to people impacted without assessment. Is that a good idea? The Bank of Canada issued an interesting report talking about there's no substitute for judgment when it comes to AI. Workers whose jobs require sound judgment, physical contacts, or special skills have little to fear from artificial intelligence. Is that true? Interesting story out of Nova Scotia, where legal activists are trying to leverage a ruling to broaden welfare benefits for homeless people. And this decision has to do with people who are living in tents in Nova Scotia. And as you can see, that tragically, that's right across the country. So is that a solution to that issue? It was just announced, I believe, yesterday in the Financial Post that consumer debt has hit a record $2.6 trillion as more Canadians fall behind on payments. And these delinquency levels are hurting a lot of people. So stay tuned on that, especially as we get into the potential impacts of job losses when it comes to this trade conflict / negotiation. A big decision came out yesterday. Meta agrees to make changes and pay up to $18 billion US. And this is in the United States about social media harms to children. And that's from the CBC. Also, today was announced an election in Quebec. And interesting, the timing here relative to all the anxiety about trade talks. And so Quebec party leaders are making their pitches as they gear up for, I believe it's an October 5 election. And that was just, again, announced today. So very interesting story that suddenly happens. And that's in addition to the by-elections in the province of Ontario, but also federal by-elections, and we'll reference those later. So we have a lot going on with the trade discussions. Today on the show, we're going to talk about the update, the background that got us to where we are. We're going to talk about what seems to be the strategies employed here by all sides, and what are the key policy issues and the actions, the solutions that will get us out of this pickle. So on that note, I wanted to share the idea that we're in a trade war.
Why does it feel like today Mark Carney is going to war? Trade war. The tone.
Because we're attacked. Like, you're at war when you get attacked. We got attacked. U.S. put 50%. We waited until the United States decided to actually implement these so-called 338 tariffs. That's fine. We've got the reserves, we got the resilience, we've got the plan, we've got the focus. We will respond. We're going to focus on what we can control. We're going to build.
And this clip is from the Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Greer.
We felt very, very confident in the deal we had struck late Tuesday night, shortly before a deadline, and we felt confident enough that we added on a few extra days to just get everything down on paper. We had agreed to, as I've shared before in the press, really the best deal available to any country on the planet with respect to Canada. And then, the Minister LeBlanc went back to Ottawa, and they spoke with premiers, spoke with the Prime Minister, and when they came back, they had some additional views, they had some additional requests, they had some additional things that were too much for the United States.
And that's from the U.S. Trade Representative. I misspoke about him being the Secretary of Commerce. Regardless, there's two different kind of narratives or approaches here around the story about why the talks broke down. We thought we had a deal already last fall, but then we also thought we had a deal this last week. And of course, that did not come together. The White House also had a response in its release, and I encourage you to read that. But the headline there is that President Trump is finally ending Canada's free ride, no longer treating Canada as a, quote, state outside the union. So there's a lot of complexity regarding this. So I thought I would bring on to this panel the A-team, and that is Georganne Burke, and she is certainly well known to Canadians. She's the Senior Vice President at the Pathway Group, and a warm welcome to you, Georganne.
Thank you. Good to see you, David.
Good to see you. And of course, the Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, known as the food professor and senior fellow at the Frontier. He's also professor at Dalhousie University, and a warm welcome to you, Sylvain.
Thank you for having me, David.
Well, I'm delighted to have both of you on here to bring some sanity and perspective on these, complex issues. I want to start off with the question, what's your take on why we don't have a deal? Why did these talks break down? Georganne, do you want to take a run at that?
Sure. So I could be political and give you a political answer, but I'm going to give you my honest answer, which is a little more cynical. I actually believe and have believed from the beginning that there wasn't enthusiasm on either side for a renegotiated USMCA. And on the Canadian side, there was no enthusiasm or very little for an actual agreement with the U.S., specifically from Mark Carney and his government. Mm-hmm. They've seemed to drag their feet on making an agreement. He said when he was elected that by July of 2025 there would be an agreement with the U.S., and of course there wasn't. And here we are in August of 2026, They had an agreement on Tuesday night, and apparently it wasn't. He decided to walk away from it. Why did he do that? Well, I believe it's because there are 3 by-elections on Monday, and he's able to ratchet up the anti-American, jingoistic sense that Canadians have fallen into, which is very unusual for Canada, but apparently this is the thing. And he's hoping that he'll do well in those by-elections. I don't think he actually had to do it. He's going to do just fine. The only one that was at any risk was maybe Chicoutimi-Le-Fort with the Bloc Québécois. I don't think there were any others that really he was in danger of losing. Also, he did a favor for his friend Doug Ford, who has 3 by-elections on the 3rd of September. And he is going to, hold off there because Doug Ford, God knows, he's the guy that has the most to say about President Trump and the U.S. So I think that's what he did. And then he also carefully said that he wouldn't put these retaliatory tariffs into place until September 8th, which was after both of those dates, which gives him a window of time of a few days to say, oh, you know what, I've decided that we're going to sit down and have a more conversation. He actually hinted at it. I want to say it was yesterday. I could be wrong about that. Said, we do want to resume negotiations. He didn't say when, he didn't say how, he didn't say where, but I believe that will be the ultimate thing. I think that they're actually trying to put all of this off until after the midterms in the U.S., but the joke will be on them, and I can talk about that later.
Okay, thank you very much, Georganne. So there seems to be an awful lot of political context and objectives kind of overriding potentially the public policy that would serve the economy of Canadians. Is that really kind of your thesis here?
You're asking me that question? Yeah, I would say yes. That the politics are taking the more important position here, which of course should not be the case. It should always be about the policies that will impact Canadians and make their lives better. I just had a call before I got onto this call with a business group that I do some work with, and they're very concerned about the situation. They have, companies that do a huge amount of their work with the U.S. back and forth, by the way, between the U.S. and Canada. The U.S. uses them, they use the U.S. It's back and forth multiple times in the processes that they work in. And they said we decided that the greatest enemy of business is uncertainty. And that is what has been created with this activity there.
Indeed, an awful lot of uncertainty. So Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, what's your take on why we don't have an agreement?
Well, there's nothing that was said thus far that I disagree with. To be honest, I do think that both parties just aren't hungry enough to have a deal for a variety of different reasons. But on the Canadian side, I do believe that there's a whole lot of politics, and you can just see it. I mean, right now there's a lot of rallying around Prime Minister Carney, and he's fueled by that enthusiasm of standing up, and I do believe that that even around the world, a lot of people are cheering for Prime Minister Carney, and that's also fueling what we see as a strategy. I don't think it is a strategy, but that seems to be what we're seeing from Ottawa. I would argue, of course, the Davos speaking and everything else, these things have come up over and over and over again. And but what I do question, though, is that after a failed negotiating process, we have seen 21 countries settling a deal with the U.S., accepting the fact that this was not necessarily a trade war, but it was more of a shift in trade and foreign policy from the U.S. perspective. And so 21 countries have actually accepted that. We were to be number 22, and we decided not to do that. The question that I'm asking myself, to be honest, is that since the Carney approach is so popular around the world, confronting the Trump administration and everything else, and why is it that we have a prime minister and a regime in Ottawa that is so popular but still remains utterly and cruelly alone, really, economically? So we hear words of support, but really Canada is incredibly isolated, and that concerns me, certainly, and it concerns a lot of businesses I speak with. in the food and ag area, which is my area.
Okay, so again, a very powerful summary. And it's interesting, Sylvain, I want to make sure I understand you in the sense that obviously there's a lot of political strategy that seems to be overriding the policy file, you could argue. And what's interesting, your observation, is that with all the 21 countries that have signed deals with the Trump administration, we are now the outlier. We are now the isolated case of a country that doesn't seem to be coming together on a trade agreement. And ultimately, we will pay the price for that as a country. And it depends on ultimately what kind of deal we get. Hopefully, we get one. But that's what you're getting at, is that we're kind of an outlier now internationally in the world.
Yeah, well, I would argue that we are paying the price already. From a reputation perspective, from an economic perspective, we're playing a dangerous game. I mean, just today we heard that we got a bit of a maple taco with the withdrawal of counter tariffs on fish and seafood. And when it was announced on Tuesday, I immediately thought that this it didn't make sense, because if you understand the fish and seafood industry, and I'm from Halifax, you do understand and appreciate that sector is incredibly globalized. 90% of what we produce in Canada is exported, and 90% of what we consume is imported. Mm-hmm. You're bound to hurt your own eventually, and so I wasn't surprised to see the reversal today. And so we're making all of these changes and shifts, and we're trying to respond against the largest economy in human history, and the language of dollar for dollar doesn't make sense to me, because if you're up against the largest economy in the history of the world, you're going to run out of runway eventually if your approach is dollar for dollar. And so I don't think that Canadians are fully aware of the leverages that we have. We just don't have any leverage. And we saw that with the Gordie Howe Bridge. I thought over the summer that the Gordie Howe Bridge would have been the great lesson for all of us in terms of how much power they have as a country, and how little confidence we should have in what comes out of the PMO. Because a lot of things that were said by the Prime Minister was not entirely accurate. We needed a American outlet to correct both the media, Canadian media, and the Prime Minister in terms of what was being negotiated. So, and that's why I'm not surprised to hear so many people say, well, okay, so we have a failed deal. Can we see the draft? And so I'm not surprised that more and more people are asking for that.
Okay, so speaking of that draft, and I think that's a very good point, is that, in good public policy, transparency is very important. And yet we've seen both really on the Canadian side and the U.S. side kind of competing narratives, like he said, she said, kind of disagreements in terms of what were the sticking points and why the negotiations broke down. So I want to explore that a little bit. So Georganne, shouldn't we just release the draft language and then it's clear where things are at?
So if I were in a position to be in charge, I would say, yes, that's what you should do. And actually, that would put the whole story to rest. We would see who was telling the truth. And it bothers me that actually it was interesting. I actually had an interview today with Jameson Greer this morning, in which he was asked about this question. And he said, we're willing to release the information, but we are respecting the Canadian government's approach, which is not to release this information. It's traditionally, Canada doesn't release this kind of stuff until it's official. That is the traditional way. They do it with bills that are before the House of Commons. They do it with treaties. They do it with trade. And so the U.S. is being polite, shockingly. But if I were them, I wouldn't be polite anymore. I just put it out and say, here it is. Okay. So I'm not exactly sure why they don't, unless there's some reason why they think they shouldn't. I don't think there is. The reasons that were given by Carney were, the issues around culture, which we now know is baloney. That's actually not true. We know that there was a question about the heavy and medium-sized trucks. I'd like to see what that problem was, because maybe that is actually an issue. But I would have thought they would have discussed it before Tuesday night, since it's kind of a big deal.
At least over the last year and a half.
Yeah, well, a year and a half is plenty of time to have talked about that, yes. Then critical minerals is another area that is important, and maybe there are issues there. But again, this has been ongoing for a year and a half. Why haven't they talked about it? Canada has critical minerals. The U.S. wants them. They can't work out a deal where the U.S. can get critical minerals from Canada. The fourth thing I had the fourth thing down here, and I just went out of my head.
Would it be the flow through
restrictions on the trade deals? Restrictions on trade deals, which, by the way, have always existed. They were in NAFTA, they were in CUSMA, and they're not restrictions saying you can't have a deal with anybody. What they're saying is you cannot trade certain things with non-market countries.
Exactly.
Like China. Okay, so nothing security based, nothing that's military based. They want to limit what they can do for security reasons, and I think everybody kind of understands that. So those were the things that are supposedly sticking points. Well, put up or shut up, guys. I'd like to see actually what's in it. That's my feeling, and it's on both countries. If the U.S. is holding it back, the Canada's holding it back. One or the other should put it out there.
Exactly. Yeah. Let us see what is happening here. Yep. And I'm trying to think if there's really any mechanism for that kind of accountability, and I'm not aware of any, other than through kind of the traditional practices that I think have been employed. And I have not seen a full research summary of this, but in past trade negotiations, what I observed was an awful lot of involvement in terms of committees in Parliament, public discussions. We need that kind of debate and discussion more and more, but it seems like the discussions are very tight in terms of the limited number of people involved and engaged. And I'm wondering, Sylvain, if that's not a really healthy process, because otherwise we are subject to really, frankly, a lot of perhaps political short-term agenda that may not serve everybody.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, when it comes to public policy, you want an informed public so they can make their own minds. And right now, we just don't have that. And so it's extremely difficult for everyone to understand what is going on. I'm not part of any negotiations personally myself, but I do talk to people impacted by some of these decisions, and they're concerned.
Absolutely,
and that's something that we need to understand. Here's the thing about what's happening right now. So we're hearing a prime minister saying we're at war, and I think the term war is used for political purposes. I do think so. I think it's more of a trade dispute than anything else.
Interesting. So you're saying it's a trade dispute. So the language we use matters. You're saying war is not really the best term.
Well, the term war, I believe the term war is used to get Canadians and businesses to accept pain for specific objectives.
Yeah. And that somehow we're standing up for Canada. Is this just basically an elbows up 2.0 strategy? Is that what you're both getting at here?
I would say, I mean, it's not the first time we've seen this all throughout history. Really, when you want to achieve political capital, if you want to get to political capital, you need an enemy. And so enemies can be quite convenient. And so when you're at war, you have clearly defined enemies. And so that's why I do think that this term is being used for political reasons, which is just not helpful at all, in my view. And so it doesn't help. It doesn't get people to truly understand what is going on here. And as soon as I hear things like, well, the midterms will take care of everything, they won't, regardless of outcome. If you understand the United States is a complicated country. So a lot of things, and Trumpism is not just about one man. it's a complex issue. And so I don't believe that midterms, regardless of outcome, will change the course. The Americans
Mhm.
or the American administration has a particular point of view on globalization. Many believe in the administration that globalization is a failed policy. I don't agree with that,
Mhm.
but the U.S. happens to be our greatest trading partner. Let's accept it and work with that. But right now, I see no attempt, no will to do just that.
Okay, so that's a very interesting analysis, Sylvain. So I'm going to turn to you, Georgianne, but I want to share a clip because I know that the response from different Canadian leaders has really been, well, some pretty vociferous rhetoric, name calling. I could show you many examples, not the least of which are Doug Ford and so many others, but I won't. But I did want to share this clip from Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew,
Mm.
and I want to seek your response in terms of this assessment that Sylvain has given, is that perhaps we don't understand the nature of the U.S. right now.
Sure, there is a desire to get back to the table, but we should recognize that the Trump administration and the president are deeply flawed. He's got 2 more years left in office. We should be prepared to duke it out for 2 years. And then hopefully sanity will return to America.
So that's one strategy. It's almost like it's a personification in one person. The idea that, like Sylvain was saying, in the U.S. side, there's a lot of mixed assessment around globalization, like the offshoring of millions of jobs, and the need from a national security point of view to reindustrialize the United States, to do steel making, build those ships, to be able to, build a strong America. So, what is your comment about that?
Well, I have to find polite language to describe what I just saw. That I'll just say that it was one of the most idiotic things I have ever heard from a premier, that didn't include insulting directly Donald Trump in
Mhm.
the way that Doug Ford does.
Yeah.
He does not understand how the United States works. 2 years is a lifetime in business. 2 year, 6 months will be a lifetime in business. We are so far along. We've already had a year and a half. Another half a year is 2 years. I don't know how they expect business to survive this. They think that, maybe he thinks because he's MVP, that we'll just throw money at it. By the way, whose money are we throwing at it? And where is this money coming from? I have no idea. Okay. We're going to throw money at the problem and we're going to give people subsidies and that's going to carry them over until when? How do they know what's going to happen in the U.S. election in 2028? They don't. Do they understand how the trade thing works in the U.S.? Do they think that the midterm elections are going to change things? They're not. A president actually has a lot of power in trade. They've got a full 2 years to wait, and he's a fool if he thinks that this country, that Canada, can last through a trade war as named by our prime minister, by the way, for that period of time. I think it's very foolish. What he said was very irresponsible, and very foolish. The Trump administration had basically four issues, which they enumerated way back. One is the dumping issue of bringing materials in from other countries, pretending they're Canadian content, and avoiding tariffs that way.
And you're saying particularly China as an
China
example.
is the chief culprit in that. Yes,
Mhm.
security. In the north, they have problems with how Canada is dealing with immigration, how they're dealing with the influx of Chinese through police stations and other things that they were doing. They're very uncomfortable with that. They're very unhappy with the fact that they haven't met their NATO obligation, not even close, and the drug problem, which I've had fights with my friends in the Conservative Party about this. Oh, no, there's no such thing. Well, actually, the RCMP came out with our very own RCMP came out with a study that said, yes, it is actually true.
Right. Yes.
Okay? So they've ignored this. They've waved the hand at President Trump, and now they've got themselves in a fix because not only is he mad about that, he's also mad about some of the other things that we talked about earlier. And I don't know. It just seems to me maybe they need to buy a copy of The Art of the Deal so they understand this guy. You know, I don't want to, I'm not hawking his books for him. I don't get any money for doing it, but I'll tell
Mhm.
you want to understand him, read that book and then act accordingly because this is not helping the country. It's breaking my heart. I'm lucky. I'm right now, as you know, living in Florida. Okay.
Mhm.
Things are lovely here. But I have many, many friends, and one of my kids still lives in Canada, and it's killing me watching what these are doing. These guys are doing so cynically. It's not
Mhm.
right. It's not okay,
Mhm.
and they need to stop.
Okay. So it's interesting. Some comments have said, we're just all blaming Carney and Canada here. Is it really that simple,
No.
Sylvain, as you look at this issue? Like I look at this objective and I say, surely our vision is to enable Canada to be the most prosperous free nation in the world, to try to use free trade as much as we can, but to be able to build also our industrial capacity as well in this country and work together as with our neighbor and ally, as a continent. I know that a number of Canadian decision makers have used the phrase several times. What is it called? Fortress.
North America.
The Fortress North America,
Yeah.
which seems kind of like a good policy picture. But, is it just really like, we've withstood a number of tweets by the president saying, Canada should be the 51st state. There's a lot of confusing rhetoric here that kind of makes Canadians defensive and say, wow, do they really like us? And can we work with them? So
Mm.
how do you ascribe the blame in this? Because it's kind of confusing, all this political rhetoric.
I find it very interesting that one of your listeners actually wrote that we shouldn't be blaming Carney. I mean, he owes his own job because he promised a deal by July 2025
He
with
set that
Donald Trump.
standard, that objective, didn't he?
And
Yeah.
so we're more than a year in past that date, and we still don't have. And in fact, actually, I think he's done everything he could not to have a deal on our side.
Mm,
And I'm
mhm.
not talking about the Trump administration, but on our side, I didn't see any will. I mean, he actually posted a video a few months ago declaring that our relationship with the United States was a liability. And
Mm,
2 weeks later, he was in New York saying that Canada should actually make America great again. I'm on a speaker's circuit.
Wait a sec. Can you clarify that again? Who said about making America
Mark
great again?
Carney.
Mark Carney in New York, yeah, in front of
In New York
investors.
City.
Yeah, it was widely documented, and frankly, I would say, I often say I just don't understand what the strategy is. To be honest, I just
Mhm.
don't. And so we're trying to get closer to China, and certainly the Trump administration sees that as a problem. And we
Mhm.
have visited, and to Carney's credit, we were able to eliminate tariffs on canola, but they did slap us on peas just recently with tariffs of 75%. And so that relationship is not clear to
Mhm.
me right now.
Mhm.
So what are we doing here? And so that's one thing. The other thing that I think needs to be recognized is our inability to understand exactly what President Trump is trying to achieve here.
Mm.
And I know that you just mentioned it, David, that, he wants to rebuild manufacturing in North America. He wants to focus more on onshoring, which to me is something that perhaps Canada should look into personally, because our processing sector is not very
Mhm.
strong. It's quite anemic, to be honest, especially in food processing. But what we've done at the lab was to measure exactly how the Trump regime has changed North America's food manufacturing landscape. And this is something
Oh,
that hasn't
interesting.
been released yet. Well, because of course everyone's looking for job numbers and GDP in food manufacturing. Is the Trump approach working really?
Mm.
Well,
Mhm.
we've noticed a couple of things. One, no, so far, 18 months in, we're not seeing more jobs in in America, in the United States, related to food manufacturing. We didn't look at other sectors, just food manufacturing. That's our field.
Mhm.
However, and this is a big however, and this is a bit of a lesson for all of us. So with a tariff-happy president, okay, he's making not just food more expensive, but he's making inputs more expensive for manufacturers. If you're a manufacturer and you're managing a plant and you're seeing the cost of goods go up as you manage what are you going to do? You're going to reinvest in your plant. You're going to reinvest in robotics, automation, AI. You're going to make your plant more efficient. You're going to make your plant more productive. Things that we're not even talking about in Canada. So in the last 18 months, GDP per hour worked in America has gone up 2% in food manufacturing. Guess what happened in Canada during that same period? It's gone down 5.8%.
Oh my. Going in the opposite direction.
Going in the opposite direction. So we have a less productive food manufacturing, which is super important for food security, obviously, and inflation. So if you have a less productive field, you're likely going to see food inflation become a bigger issue, and you have a sector vulnerable to tariffs and other things. In America, right now, we're seeing a stronger, more productive, efficient food sector, but you'll never, ever hear that in the media because in some way, I would say that right now, the tariff approach is not necessarily leading to more onshoring, but it's certainly leading to a more efficient, productive food economy.
Interesting. We'll certainly look forward to that report, Sylvain. It's a very interesting summary there. I want to mention that we're getting lots of comments from the audience. That's terrific. And I want to share two straw polls that we did take. We just dropped them, I believe, 24 hours ago. And the response has been very interesting. The first question was, should Canada keep pushing back or make a deal with Trump? And so 6% said keep pushing back, make a deal, 81%, find a middle ground, 11%, and 1% said not sure. And then the second question was who pays the biggest price in a Canada-U.S. trade war? And that is consumers, 22%, businesses at 2%, for workers, and everyone at 73%. Now, I know that's not a scientifically based poll, but I want to start with the second question. Who's really going to pay for this so-called trade war? Who's really going to pay for this, dispute in terms of this trade negotiation? And Sylvain, I want to go back to you and then Georganne, because I think this is a very important reality because it begs the question, is this, retaliatory approach going to be effective? Sylvain, do you want to start off on that one?
Well, I think your readership is getting it. It's everyone. I mean, if it's hard to run a prosperous economy when you're arguing with your number one trading partner. And so in the last year, basically what happened is that we were surpassed by Mexico. Why? Mexico is now the number one trading partner to the U.S.
Mexico is
above Canada. And you know why? Because President Sheinbaum has decided to play the game. And I hear a lot in the media in Canada that, well, why settle a deal with President Trump when he always changes his mind? Well, I just go back to the 21st deals that he signed. He hasn't changed his mind. And when it comes to Mexico, things are progressing quite well. And so I think it's the approach. And frankly, to me, it's pretty clear that the Trump administration is not comfortable with Ottawa's approach in any of this. And so that's why, and with Claude Sheinbaum, and by the way, Claude Sheinbaum is quite less leaning compared to
communist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outspoken communist.
But they're doing business.
But she's delivering.
Yeah,
she's delivering because she's playing along. She understands how to deal with Donald Trump, and she's done her homework clearly. Because I actually was in Mexico, I think it was about a year ago, and you could tell that Mexicans aren't as nervous, and they don't really take things they don't tackle this issue emotionally. They don't take any of this personally, and they've been attacked quite a bit. The Gulf of America, the wall, narco president. I can go on and on. They've been insulted over and over again. So they have every reason to be upset. But they just decide to move on and focus on the economics of the deal.
Do the business for the sake of the people. Georganne, what's your response? What's your take on that question?
So
Who pays for this?
I will agree with Sylvain, but I think there's a continuum. First, the businesses will suffer. Okay. Then, of course, the workers will suffer because the businesses are suffering. They can't keep them on. And eventually, everybody is going to suffer because we're going to have people not working. We're going to have businesses disappearing, which means where are we going to get the things that maybe they actually sell in Canada too? Everything is going to end up having to be imported. Prices are going to go up. Nobody's going to be able to afford things. I don't understand the mentality behind this. There's an attitude problem, and I think Sylvain was kind of getting at it with it, comparing Mexico and Canada and how they've dealt with this trade stuff. Mexico is like, he can call us whatever he wants, narco this, wall that, whatever. But the truth is, Trump has even said she's a communist and she's easier to deal with than the Canadians. Okay, he said that, and those exact words. And the truth is, she was smart. January of 2025, they were in Washington, D.C. with bells on saying, how can we work together? And they knew it wasn't going to be an overnight thing because they had to, they were interested in extracting themselves from Kuzma because of the unequal relationship there. This is going to change the balance of the relationship a bit, and I think to Mexico's advantage. Canadians, for some reason, are so thin-skinned that if he... Well, the 51st state thing, I think I've talked to you about this before, David. This was a joke that happened at a dinner at Mar-a-Lago where Trudeau turned around and said, a 25% tariff will be the end of Canada. And so Trump turned around and looked at him and says, well, okay, so why don't you just become the 51st state? You could be the governor, and that'll fix it all. So it got repeated, by the way, not by the Americans, by the Canadians who are horrified at this terrible thing he said. And then it became a thing. And Trump's bad characteristic is, when he sees a scab, he likes to pick at it. And that's what he did. He realized it bothered Canadians, and he picked. He stopped for a while. Then every once in a while, you hear it come back, either from him or one of the people in his administration. The truth is, they don't want Canada to be a 51st state. It's acted like it's the 51st state for the last 50 years. They're not interested in that. They want to just be a partner. Like, grow up, be a partner.
Yeah.
Why would the yes want a second California? Really?
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better. There you go.
So, gosh, this is a complex discussion. And so I want to zero in a little bit on some of the U.S. demands. We have a slide, and we don't really have time in this context to go through every one of them. But there's been an awful lot of points here made in summary, and this is off of Global News. So thank you, Global. But, some of these ones are ones that we've already mentioned in terms of, none of this backdoor trade that comes in through China, through Canada into the United States. Obviously, that is a big issue. We've gone through issue after issue around, say, elimination of cultural and language protections, which is a very interesting one. And I'm fascinated by this because just today, I believe there's a story by our trade minister saying LeBlanc welcomes the U.S. decision, quote, withdrawing positions on language and culture. And, this kind of demand, the assertion is the U.S. made this demand. And I can't imagine a more sensitive issue to throw at French language speakers, particularly in Quebec and certainly the Maritimes. And the president's response is, I would never interfere with Canadians speaking French. In fact, I have never even thought of doing such a stupid thing. This lie was made up by a weak and ineffective prime minister in an attempt to gain political support, which he has totally lost from the people of Quebec. I love French Canadians. So it is really confusing because you have this story release. It's like, and Jamieson Greer, the U.S. trade representative, said, no, that was never even on the table. So I am very confused, and I can't imagine what my fellow Canadians are confused as well. Like, who said whom here, Sylvain? Do you want to take a pass at that one?
With with all of his flaws, I believe that President Trump is pretty darn smart. He knows what he's doing. And just looking at this post, I'm in Quebec right now. So they just launched a new political campaign here. There's an election coming in October. And this post was talked about over and over and over again, believing that President Trump is trying to encourage Quebec separation, okay, and make Prime Minister Carney's job more difficult. You know, we love Quebec, we love French Canadians, so he's rallying behind Quebec, and so there was almost a underlying appreciation for the post, because I mean, a lot of people in Quebec couldn't care less about Ottawa, to be honest, which is why federal politics is not as influential in Quebec than in other places. But you know, when you look at the 50% tax or the 50% tariffs that were implemented over the weekend, I mean, if you boil it down, if you look at the numbers, there are 3 provinces that were there's one province that was going to be severely impacted by the tariffs, and that's Ontario.
Yeah.
And so, I mean,
so was that by accident or by design, do you think?
Oh, it's by design, absolutely. And so, and when we look at our own counter tariff, our own retaliation, our own response, I mean, if you look at the map and where tariffs are going to be hitting different states, most states that are going to be impacted by Ottawa's approach are blue states. And I just wonder why Ottawa is doing that. Is it on purpose? If it is, why would you want to hit blue states? Wouldn't you want to hit like swing states a little bit more? Michigan is hit a little bit more, but other than that, so there's as soon as Trump is mentioned, people dismiss whatever is said after. Nobody has actually dared to give credit. The only reporter I've seen giving credit to Donald Trump is a reporter from the Globe and Mail, and she was actually on the CBC, I think it was last week, and she gave credit to Donald Trump, and you could see that really the host was trying to swallow her own vomit as she was talking about what was going on. But as soon as we start appreciating strategy, we're going to come to a better place, and we're going to get better policy. Until that happens, we're still going to just go with that tit for tat sort of game.
Okay. So, but I hear from both of you, you're challenging all of us, all Canadians, to grow up and put aside emotion and try to look at this rationally. And that's not always easy because people are going to suffer in this. I was just talking with a friend of mine who's a leader in agriculture, and he said, you know, these tariffs are potentially going to be waged on, are really going to hit farmers hard when it comes to the price of their equipment. And that's just one of, endless examples where this is going to really hurt people. And so you're going to have to, every Canadian is going to have to look at that carefully and say, is that paying the kind of path we want to go down? And is it going to serve the country ultimately and strategically? So I've always been taught that in an asymmetrical negotiation with a really large player like the United States versus a small player like Canada, I believe the U.S. economy is some 13 times larger than the Canadian economy. You've really got to pay attention to how you understand their objectives. So rationally, you can be smart and really help safeguard our own economy. So
David, guess I just saw a comment posted, oh my God, Trump can't win. Well, let me tell you something. Trump won already. He won already. Look at the media coverage on both sides of the border. I mean, on our side, it's all about Trump.
Yes.
In the U.S., they're barely paying attention to this story.
Pretty much silence. Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. Why? Because, 75% of our exports go to the U.S., and for them, 12% goes to Canada. Stakes are extremely low compared to ours.
Yeah.
Each one.
Right.
It's just a matter of how much pain are we willing to accept.
Right. Yeah. So the math doesn't work here. If you escalate, and there's all kinds of research regarding that issue. So in
We chose
Canada's case
pain.
in
We
particular,
chose
yeah,
pain. We're
exactly. We're
choosing pain.
choosing pain. And then you can debate, well, is it for policy gain to serve Canadians, or is it for political gain? So, but in this case, the numbers are overwhelming. If you look at Stats Canada, if the exports from Canada to the United States, they make up maybe 1% of the GDP of America, whereas the exports or pardon me, the imports we get from the United States into Canada represent some 70% of our GDP. So it's a very lopsided equation here. So, Georganne, as you look at this, I want to ask you a really simple question. If there's a change in the presidency, as in midnight tonight, and there's even a change where the entire Congress and Senate of the United States go from Republican to Democrat, do you think this trade policy will fundamentally shift?
Oh, David, the Democrats have no interest in preserving American sovereignty and trade. They are just the same as the globalist Canadian government, and they would go immediately back to the future. Go backwards. That's not happening anyway. Congress may or may not change. I personally don't think that the Republicans are going to lose the midterms. I think they're going to be about the same, and that's because of redistricting.
Interesting. So you think the GOP, the Republican Party, is going to maintain control
Yes.
of both the Senate and the Congress?
Yes.
Okay.
And largely because of the change in the laws around the way you form a district. That being said, the president's not going anywhere until 2028. He's not going anywhere.
And that is a fact.
Even if he, God forbid, were to have something awful happen to him and he wasn't on this earth any longer, there's a vice president who's a very, very conservative guy, J.D. Vance, who's not going to change the trade policy. Okay, he's not going to. The government is firmly behind this president, and the reason is that he has understood and spoken about it for 40 years that the trade policy worldwide, this isn't about Canada, Canadians, stop obsessing about yourselves. It isn't about you. The trade policy around the world has always put the U.S. at a disadvantage. And that's because the U.S. was the biggest guy, the biggest player, and they were always nice to everybody. Well, he's not so nice. He took the table and he flipped it over and he said, we're doing things differently for everybody. There were only 2 countries in the world that took retaliatory tariffs. One was China and one was Canada. Everybody else, and you've talked about it before, all these other countries that have signed on to deals, they've done it because they know he's not going to renege on a deal. He made a deal. He's happy with it. He signed it. He's going to go with it. Okay. I don't know where this nonsense is coming from that he's going to renege and all this other stuff. People just make it up. They make it up because they hate him so much that they can't see the truth through their Trump derangement syndrome, which is very sad. That's not to say that he is a perfect person. By no stretch is he. He's not an easy guy to deal with. But as I said, it would be nice if the people who are negotiating with him kind of took a lesson from Claudia Sheinbaum and said, how do we work with this guy?
Okay. That is a very great insight, Georganne. I want to also ask about responses. And one of the responses is to kind of up the ante, not just talking about war, but basically proposing actions that would almost be like war. We have Doug Ford talking about electricity again. We supply an awful lot of electricity to the United States, and we're really interdependent in some ways, but also oil about being back on the table. And I want to share this clip from Danielle Smith because it almost sounds like an interesting insight as she talks and warns us about a kind of a boomerang effect.
Although I understand the need to respond strongly to these tariffs, I cannot think of a more disastrous policy decision than cutting off or taxing Alberta's oil to the United States. Doing so would absolutely devastate the Canadian economy. It would not only extinguish the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of Albertans, it would economically hobble our friends and neighbors in other provinces to the east. Let me explain why. And it's important that this be understood by every Canadian. If Canada were to put, let's say, a 50% export tariff on the 4 million barrels of oil that we export daily to the United States would immediately respond with a 50 to 100% export tariff on oil and natural gas that they export to Ontario, along with millions of barrels of diesel fuel and gasoline that Ontario and Quebec import from the Midwest. This would bring the economies of Ontario and Quebec to a grinding halt. Meanwhile, all those refineries in the United States that currently use Alberta's heavy oil would start looking to Venezuela for replacement heavy oil and reverse the pipelines northward to get it to Midwest refineries. As a result, we would lose the United States as a customer entirely and likely forever. This would result in the loss of about 500,000 jobs at a minimum, mostly in Alberta, but also hundreds of thousands of jobs in Ontario and Quebec.
So, Sylvain, I'm going to turn to you first. What's your comment on that Premier's remarks?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not an oil expert, but you can actually kind of use the same arguments with potash. And so there's been lots of talk about potash as well. And I mean, all the arguments that Premier Smith is putting forward about oil, you can apply to potash, basically. And so Americans have buying power. They can buy themselves out of a problem. If you restrict or if you tax, they'll go somewhere else. So with potash, they have options. They can go to Belarus. They can go through Germany, through Israel. It may actually get more expensive, but they'll get what they need. On the other hand, in Canada, royalties will be impacted. Prices would go up. Farmers would need potash, would need fertilizers. Those fertilizers will become more expensive because Canpotex's job, and of course Nutrien and two Canadian companies, need to make money, or else they're going to lose money and they're going to lay off people. So at the end of the day, you're trying to restrict. You're trying to make your own product less attractive. By the end of the day, you're going to hurt farmers. You're going to hurt your public coffers, and you're going to hurt consumers in the end. So it would be disastrous to do that. And so I'm happy. So Scott Moe, also the Premier of Saskatchewan, has also came out saying the same exact thing as Premier Smith, and that was the right thing to do.
Right on. So are we playing a dangerous game here, Georganne? I mean, I think the tone of this rhetoric, where we're going, is ironic in so many ways. Not only are provincial premiers not responsible for trade, the last time I checked our constitutional responsibilities, but the tone, is it really being monitored? Are people obviously paying attention to this in the United States? And does this impact really how they perceive us as a future reliable ally and trading partner? And then hence we're just kind of undermining our own future.
So I had a meeting yesterday with a guy who's running for office down here in Florida. And you know what his interest was in the Canadian-U.S. trade thing? None. Okay, he's running for office. Zero. And it's not because he's stupid. It just doesn't impact the daily life of Americans in the same way that it does Canadians. Americans are not consumed day in and day out like Canadians are with Canada. When there's hockey going on, they're paying attention to Canada. If somebody's playing the Blue Jays from the U.S., they're paying attention to Canada. I will tell you what is going to hurt Canada was that stupidity out of the CBC yesterday about 9/11. That's going to hurt Canada because that's going to make the news.
I must have missed that one.
Oh, well, it's really ugly. They were instructed not to refer to the 9/11 terrorists as terrorists, that it wasn't terrorism. Okay, you should take a look at it. It's bizarre and disgusting. U.S. media will get a hold of that, and they will skewer Canada for that. And this does not help when you have things like this going on. But the fact is that Canada could get out of this if they had leadership that really understood that it was important. Danielle Smith was 100% correct. Every word she said was right. I've said before, I'm not a groupie of Danielle Smith, but when she's right, she's right. And she was correct. And who was the guy that, by the way, thought, we'll tax the oil? Doug Ford. Is there any oil coming from Ontario? Not last time I checked.
Wow. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, I know you need to wrap up here as you go to another meeting, another media engagement. Is there a final comment in terms of what Canada should be doing here to rebuild its nation, its economic future? We don't even have Ironically, as we talk about trade with the United States, we don't even have free trade in Canada. What
Yeah.
policy action do we need to do to move Canada forward?
Well, I mean, barriers are actually quite costly between provinces. So that's certainly something that we've discussed before and that needs to be addressed, like for real. So certainly there's that. But to go back to CUSMA and our good friends to the south, the United States, I would say, you know, either become transparent about what was going on, so people can accept why why the process will be painful for everyone. I
Yeah.
mean, our prime minister is basically asking us to suffer. Well, if we are to suffer, we need to know why, and we have to understand exactly what's going on. Otherwise, go back to the table as soon as possible. Do everything you can to bring certainty back to our economy. And that's really cruelly absent right now.
I think that's great advice, Sylvain. If you expect people, Canadians, by the hundreds of thousands to lose their jobs, you at least need to be transparent in terms of what the heck happened. So well said, Sylvain, and let's look forward to our next conversation and wish you all the best, my friend.
All right. Thank you for inviting me. Take care. Bye-bye.
So as we wrap up here, Georganne, I want to share with you a very interesting clip from, I think, someone you know, who had his take on the politics of this. And this is from a U.S. leader. And I wanted to share his perspective on what the heck is going on here from his analysis. And I want to ask for your reaction.
You'd wonder why he would get into a trade war when Canada is completely dependent on the U.S. in terms of trade. I mean, and it's not the other way around. I mean, so we don't need Canada. Our exports to Canada account for 1% of GDP. Canada's exports to the U.S. are 17% of their GDP. So, and by the way, they have a pretty respectable trade surplus. The surplus country always loses in a trade war because they're more dependent on their exports. So he's just getting into a fight because all he has is Trump derangement syndrome. That's why he's prime minister. The Conservative Party was up 20 points in the polls. Granted, I think President Trump might have made a mistake by getting into that spat with him because, that's why he ran on an anti-Trump platform. And that's what got him elected, but it's not good for the people of Canada. Their GDP per capita is 30% less than US GDP per capita. And a generation ago, it was almost equal. So, the Trudeau-Carney policies have wrecked that country. And it was basically a lost 10 years, a lost decade for Canada under Trudeau. And now we're going to see more of it, maybe even worse, from Mark Carney because he hates the president so much.
What do you think of that analysis, Georganne Burke?
Yeah, that's my friend Greg Swenson from the UK, Republicans overseas. He's correct. And I would call on all Canadians, including some of the people who have had comments over here that are kind of showing their Trump derangement syndrome. I've seen a few. It's not helpful to do this. It's not actually helping. It doesn't make anybody feel any better. It makes everyone feel more miserable personally in your own personal life. And it's not going to get the result that you think it's going to get. Donald Trump doesn't care what you say. He doesn't care. He's got his objectives. He's got his goals. He knows what he wants. He's got the people in place that are going to carry out his agenda because they agree with him. They're not doing it because they're forced to. They don't have to. They believe in it. And they understand why he's doing it, that he's trying to strengthen his job is to make America great again, to put America first. That's his job. Unfortunately, we don't have political leaders in Canada who have the same attitude. Canada first, make Canada strong. The biggest lie he told in all of this was the first day that he spoke when he announced that they had walked away from the agreement, when he said, "We got rid of all the trade barriers between the provinces." I burst out laughing. I said, that is the biggest lie ever. That's not what happened. Take care of that first, at least. Make it possible to trade easily within your own country. And then, as I said, pull up your big boy pants. And I mean that literally for everybody, all Canadians. Stop whining about Donald Trump. He's not going anywhere for a couple of years. He's the person we have to deal with. Press our government to do the right thing and find a solution to this before it's too late.
Okay. Well, I think that's wise advice. I mean, part of the context here and what's confusing is the rhetoric. I mean, obviously, we're proud Canadians, at least, I mean, I am. And I'll speak for myself. And my personal frustration is that we have so many opportunities from a policy point of view to really increase the level of prosperity. And we have many slides on this. And at the Frontier Center for Public Policy, we're very proud of those recommendations. And it's a matter of acting on them. I think we cite like 12 key recommendations right off the top that one could do, like just as you said, open and free internal markets, restore our energy industrial freedom. For the last many years, decade, there's been a war on oil and gas as one example. Let's reform our tax system. It's not competitive. Now, you have spent an awful lot of time in Ottawa, Georganne. You know the hallways well.
I do.
You know decision makers. Why has there been such little action on what I would call really doing the basics to move this country forward? I mean, we're looking at, what is it, just kind of an updated version of our economic performance in terms of OECD countries is pathetic. I mean, it is just simply not acceptable. We can do a lot better. I can bring up I think the slide here, Madam Producer, shows that we're at the bottom of the heap here when it comes to cumulative real GDP from 2025, using Q1 as their base, to 2026 Q1. And we are at the bottom. This is a fact. And it doesn't have to be this way. So I look at this and I say, why is it, Georganne, that we don't seem to have a political class, decision makers who are willing to make decisions and get to results rather than just performative rhetoric and theater and announcements? Am I being too cynical here?
No, actually, probably there are people that won't like what I'm about to say, but this is a sign of the Canadian worldview that has evolved from years of gentle socialism through a variety of things. Also from having this little brother relationship with the U.S. that they've been able to milk, or whatever you want to call it, for years. And now when they got somebody there who says, you know what, no more, we have to have a little bit more adult relationship, they freak out, because actually it is going to change the calculus for the country, because they haven't looked at things like productivity. They have crippled our natural resource industry, not just oil and gas, but many other parts of the natural resource industry, not letting people mine, not letting people, drill, none of it. Okay. And it's all in the name of climate change. Okay. And, there's so many mistakes that they have made in the way that they approach the country. There are barriers still between provinces. We just talked about that. The tax system is onerous. My son had a choice 5 years ago whether he would open a business in the U.S. or Canada. He said it took him 5 minutes to decide to open it in the U.S. He had a choice. He could do it either way because he was a citizen in both countries. He came to the U.S. He opened the business. There's less red tape. The taxes are way lower. He has plenty of willing labor because it's a labor-intensive business he's in. He's not looking for fancy computer engineers, just looking for regular people. People are eager to work here. Cost of living is lower here. So he chose the U.S. That's sad because it wasn't always the way it was. People need to do a little introspection. Canadians do. And by the way, this is something that's not exclusive to the Liberals. All of our parties are very, very weak on the things that they need to do to fix the country. I did see Pierre Poilievre did have a conversation, he said, with the Prime Minister about this trade deal. He told him he wants to have the trade deal made public, and he's right, it should be. But it's not going to happen because Carney won't do it. He doesn't want to. Why should he? He doesn't have to. That's the system of government we're in. You're in government, you control it all. So this is, but it's going to be, Canadians actually have to get a grip on themselves and demand more of their elected officials and the policymakers. They have to say, we're not happy with this. You need to fix this.
Okay. Well, Georganne Burke, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, as well as Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. And this is a challenging time. I dare say it's a historic time for our country, where we've got to choose further the economic paths, but also our own approach to how we really, frankly, grow up as a sovereign nation, I think. I think what you've done has really challenged us in that way. So thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's great to see you, David.
So on that note, I wanted to also highlight a very interesting event that's coming up in Winnipeg on September 14 and 15. It's called Reclaiming the North. It's about strategic utility corridors for sovereignty and economic development in Canada's Arctic. And we think this is an innovative policy concept that's worth looking at. We've got a number of leading speakers right across the country joining us, from First Nation leaders to Lieutenant General Michelle Maisonneuve, former Chief of Staff of the Canadian Army. But this is a discussion about how to fundamentally move our economy forward as we look at a utility corridor to Port Nelson on Hudson's Bay in Canada. So people are very welcome to check that out, but we think we need to think of innovative solutions to how we move this country forward. So we hope you can join us. And on that note, I want to thank everyone in terms of our audience, our guests, as well as MCA Media, and of course our producer, Lorraine. We are grateful that you could join us today for this important conversation. We welcome your feedback, and be sure to join us next week as we talk about important issues. Be sure to check us out on the Frontier website and subscribe to our newsletter and our channel. So on that note, I want to thank everyone, and I hope you have a terrific week.
Here at Frontier, we don't receive any government funding. We are nonpartisan, and we work for you. Find out more and support this important work by visiting fcpp.org today.